Willa Mabry did not argue when the clerk drew his pen through the mare's name. She stood at the counter in the front room of the Cordis County Stock Association with both hands flat on the wood and watched the ink travel across the page in one unhurried stroke, and she did not argue, and she did not look away, and it was the not looking away that the 6 men by the stove would still be talking about at the end of the fall. She had 36 days. On the 15th of October, she owed the quartermaster at Fort Adair 4,100 pounds of freight, and if it was not standing on the loading platform by dark of that day, she owed the bonding agent 41 head of horses instead, which was every horse she had in the world, including the one whose name had just been crossed out. If you have come this far into the story with her, subscribe and stay with me, because the mare on that crossed-out line is the whole of it, and I want you here when this county finds out what it has just written off. Description, the clerk said again. His name was Otley, and he had a small, careful voice, and he was not a cruel man, only a man who liked a ruled page. I have to have a description that agrees with the record. Mrs. Mabry. I can't enter a horse on your word alone. She is 8 years old this spring, Willa said. 14 hands 3. Buckskin, black points, black mane and tail, a black stripe down her back from her withers to her tail head, and a good black hoof on her, all 4. And her sire. I don't know her sire. And her dam. A brown Mustang mare that ran the Cimarron sandhills until somebody roped her. I don't know her dam's dam either, and I don't expect anybody living does. Otley set the pen down. He had a way of setting a pen down that was worse than shouting. Then she is grade stock, he said. Unrecorded, I will put her on the tally as a grade mare. Yellow, no record. Her color is buckskin. The book calls that yellow. The book is wrong. Somebody by the stove laughed at that, a short laugh, cut off almost before it started, the way a man laughs when he wants the room to know he heard something and does not want to be the one holding it. Willa did not turn around. There were 6 of them back there, feed store men and 2 of Harlan Vestry's riders, and a saddler named Prouse, and she knew every voice. And she had known all of them longer than she had known her husband, and not one of them had come out to the place after Tom died, except to ask what she meant to do about the horses. Harlan Vestry himself was not by the stove. He was behind the counter, where he had been the whole time, at the tall desk with the association's book open in front of him. And he had not written anything since she came in. He was a heavy, clean man of 50-some years, silver at the temple, wearing a coat that had cost more than her wagon, and he was the secretary of the Cordis County Stock Association, which meant he was the book, and the book was him, and everybody in that room understood the arithmetic of it. Otley, Vestry said, without looking up. Put her down as off-color. Sir? Off-color, bred by accident, no record. That is what she is. He turned a page. He did it slowly, the way a man does when he wants you to watch him, not hurry. He had nothing against her mare, he said. She might be a perfectly serviceable animal. But there was a difference, he explained, between an animal that worked and an animal that stood for something. And the association had been formed to keep the second kind straight, and if a man began writing yellow-grade mares out of the strip into a book that had a Kentucky stallion in it, then the book stopped meaning anything at all. I have horses of my own to sell this fall, Willa said. Then sell them, Vestry said. Don't register them. Nobody buys a paper. They buy a horse. He smiled when he said it, and it was almost kind, and that was the thing about Harlan Vestry that took people years to understand. He never said the cruel version. He let you carry the cruel version out into the street yourself and think about it there. She picked up her hat off the counter, and she did not thank anyone, and she went out into the September light on the main street of Pardee, Kansas, in the year 1885, and stood a moment on the boards while her eyes adjusted, because the front room of the association was dark and the street was not. The mare was at the rail where she had left her. Buckskin, which the book called yellow, the color of good tallow when it is fresh out of the kettle and has not yet gone white, which was exactly how she had come by her name. And the name had been an insult too, and Willa had kept it the same way she kept everything else that had been handed to her hard. 3 years back, at the fall sale in the yards behind the Pardee depot, a strip trader named Odell Sykes had run a string of unbroke range horses through the ring and got nothing for any of them, and at the tail of that string had come a 5-year-old buckskin mare with a rope burn on her near hind and a look in her eye like a door shut on somebody's fingers. Sykes had stood up on the rail and told the yard she was tallow and hide, and there was no third thing about her, and Willa Mabry, who had come in that day to buy harness leather and nothing else, had said $9 out loud, and had never afterward been able to explain why. Tom had laughed all the way home. He had not laughed unkindly. He had said, "Well, you have bought us a coat of paint and a set of legs," and she had said, "Look at her hoof, Tom." And Tom, who knew horses the way most men know their own hands, had looked at the hoof and had stopped laughing, and had ridden the rest of the way home quiet. 14 months ago, Tom Mabry had died of lung fever in 6 days in February, with the wind out of the north the whole time. And Willa had buried him on the rise above the corrals in ground she had to build a fire on first to soften, and she had come back down the hill and put her hand on the buckskin mare's neck and stood there until it got dark. Now she untied the mare from the rail and stood a minute with her forehead against the flat of the mare's cheek, which was a thing she did not do where men could see. And the mare stood for it the way she stood for everything, patient, half asleep, one hind foot cocked, 1,600 pounds of nothing anybody in that town wanted. "They put you down as yellow," Willa said. "No record." The mare breathed out through her nose. "That is about what I expected," Willa said, and got up on her, and rode out of Pardee south, toward the line, toward the strip, toward home. It was 11 miles to the crossing of the Little Sandy, and another 9 to her own gate, and the country between was the best country in the world if you had the eye for it, and the worst in the world if you did not. Shortgrass, buffalo grass, and blue grama, cured brown gold on the stem by September, so short in places you could see the ground through it. And men coming out from Missouri or from Illinois looked at that and saw poverty. What they did not see was that grass which cures standing on the stem is hay that harvests itself, and that a horse raised on it will hold flesh in January, on feed a corn-fed horse would starve beside. Tom used to say the shortgrass was a bank that did not put up a sign. She came down to the Little Sandy in the middle of the afternoon, 100 feet of wet sand with a thread of water working through it and cottonwoods leaning over from both banks. The mare walked into the crossing and drank, and Willa let her. On the far bank, a survey stake had been driven that had not been there in the spring. It was new pine, still yellow at the cut, and it stood up out of the grass about knee-high, and there was nothing written on it at all. Willa looked at it a long moment from the middle of the creek. Then she rode on south, and did not think about it again for 8 days, and she would remember that afterward, that she had ridden right past the whole thing while it was still only a piece of pine in the grass, and had not felt one single thing. The contract had come to her 4 days before that, and it had come to her the way most good things come to people like Willa Mabry. Sideways, and only because everybody better placed had already said no. Fort Adair sat 40 miles north and a little west of Pardee, an old 2-company post on the flats above the Adair Fork, and every year in the last part of the summer the quartermaster there put out for bids on what everybody called the winter haul. Flour, beans, coffee, salt, sugar, sheet iron, window glass and straw, nails, lamp oil. Medical stores, the 1,000 things a place full of men needs to get from October to April without going hungry or blind or crazy. The rail came no closer than Pardee, and from the depot to the post gate was 40 miles of road that a loaded wagon made in 3 days. For 11 years the winter haul had gone to the Bar V, which was Harlan Vestry, who owned 9 freight wagons and 60 head of heavy imported horses, and did not much care whether he made money on it, because what he wanted was the standing of being the man who fed the post. That year the quartermaster, a captain named Ellis Bourne, who had been at Adair 19 months and had not yet learned to like anyone in Cordis County, opened the bids and did not like what he saw. Vestry's figure was high, the way a figure is high when a man has been the only bidder for 11 years. The 2 other bids were from Pardee men who had gone in with Vestry on other things, and both were higher still, which told Bourne everything he needed to know about how bidding worked in that county. So he did an unusual thing. He split the haul. He let the bulk of it to the Bar V at the Bar V's price, because he had to have it and there was nobody else with 9 wagons. And then he took the balance, 4,100 pounds of it, the sheet iron and the glass and the nails and the lamp oil and the medical stores, and offered it separately to anybody at all who would put up a bond and sign a date. Nobody wanted it. 4,000 pounds is an awkward number. It is too much for 1 wagon and not enough for 3. And every outfit in the county with wagons enough to move it was already working for Vestry on the other half. Willa Mabry heard about it on the 8th day of September from the woman who kept the hotel in Pardee, Ottilie Prine, who told her about it the way a person tells you about a hole in the road they hope you will step in. Willa rode to Fort Adair the next morning and was at the quartermaster's office at 7 and waited on the step until 9. "You have no wagons," Captain Bourne said, when he had read what she handed him. "No, sir. Then how do you propose to move 4,000 pounds of freight 40 miles? "On horses," Willa said. 19 head. 215 pounds apiece, and a little over. Bourne set down his pen. He was a narrow, tired-looking man with ink on his second finger, and he had spent 19 months trying to get anything at all done in a county where every road ran through one man's front room, and he looked at her for a while without any expression she could read. "Packing," he said. "Yes, sir. Who taught you to pack?" "My father," Willa said. She told him the rest of it flat, the way a person recites a thing they have never had to argue for. Her father had freighted with mules in the Sierras for 11 years before he came out to Kansas, and he had put a diamond hitch on a sawbuck the way other men tie a shoe. And she had thrown her first one at 9 years old and had it taken apart in front of her and been made to throw it again. She had thrown one nearly every year since. She and her husband had packed the mining trade out of the Spanish Peaks 4 seasons before they bought their place. "Your husband is dead. 14 months. And you can do it alone." "I will not be alone. And I would not want a man who could not do it, so I would rather have 2 who can than 6 who cannot." Bourne got up and went to the window. Outside on the parade, a farrier was working on a troop horse with a foot between his knees, and 2 soldiers were carrying a stove. "There is a bond," he said. $600, forfeit if the freight is not on my platform by dark on the 15th of October. And then he was plain with her, because he said he preferred to be. The bond was not there to protect the government. $600 would not buy him window glass in November. The bond was there so that whoever took the contract had something to lose, because he had been 11 years' worth of lied to by people in that county and had run clean out of the habit of trust. "I do not have $600, Willa said. "I did not think you did. I have 41 head of horses, every one of them sound, and every one of them mine, free of any lien, and I will put the whole band up against it." Bourne turned around. "All of them," he said. "All of them. If you are late by 1 hour, I take your horses." "You will not take them. The bonding agent takes them. I know how it is written, and you will not be late by 1 hour, Captain, because I do not intend to be." He looked at her a while longer. Then he sat back down and pulled the form across and began to write, and while he wrote he said, not unkindly, "You understand that Mr. Vestry will regard this as a personal matter." "Mr. Vestry regards the weather as a personal matter," Willa said. Bourne's mouth moved slightly. It was not quite a smile, but it was in the family. 15th of October, he said. Dark signed there. She signed there. That was the 5th. On the 9th, Otley the clerk drew a line through the mare's name, and Harlan Vestry did not look up from his book, and it should have been plain to her then, and afterwards she would say that it was, that a man does not take the trouble to be that carefully polite unless he has already decided how a thing is going to end. On the 12th of September the proclamation went up. It came out of the governor's office at Topeka, and it was printed on a single sheet, and there were copies of it nailed to the door of the land office, the wall of the depot, both sides of the bridge, and the front of the Cordis County Stock Association, and every one of those copies had gone up before 8 in the morning, which meant somebody had had them in hand the night before. The Texas fever had been through the eastern counties in July and August. It always did, and it always would until somebody worked out that it traveled on ticks and not on the air, which nobody had yet, and every summer the northern herds along the trail roads died of a thing that the southern herds carried and did not take. And every summer the northern stockmen went to their legislatures and asked for the only remedy anybody could think of, which was a line on a map. The line ran along the southern boundary of the state, and the proclamation said that from the date of its issue until the first day of November, no cattle, horses, mules, or asses driven or trailed from any point south of the said boundary line should be permitted to enter or cross the counties named, and the counties named began with Cordis. And the crossings of the Little Sandy were named in particular, all 3 of them, by name, in a proclamation issued from a desk 400 miles east by a man who had never in his life heard of Chalk Springs or the Adair Fork or the 90 yards of gravel bottom where the Pardee road went down into the creek. Willa Mabry's place lay 9 miles south of that line, in the public land strip, where there was no land office, and no sheriff, and no court, and no title to anything but what a man could hold, and where every horse she owned had been raised, and every one of those horses was, by the plain and unarguable letter of a document, nailed to 4 walls in Pardee, southern stock. She did not believe it until she rode into it. That is not a failing of hers particularly. It is how people are built. A thing can be nailed to 4 walls in a town, and a person can read every word of it twice and still go on believing, underneath, that the world will make an exception for them. Because the world has always made a few. On the 16th of September, Willa put 4 horses under light packs and started for Pardee to fetch the first of the freight down from the depot, because it had come in by rail and was sitting in the yard under a tarpaulin and somebody had to move it. She came to the middle crossing of the Little Sandy a little after 10 in the morning, with the sun already hot, and the cottonwoods hanging still and yellow edged over the water, and there was a plank across the road. It was a good plank. That was what she noticed first, and she thought about it a great deal later. It was a 16-foot 2x10 of milled pine, and it had been set into 2 posts that had been dug and tamped, not driven, and the posts had been squared off on top with a saw. Nobody had thrown that across the road in a hurry. Somebody had built it, with a level, on a day when they had time. There was a canvas fly rigged in the cottonwoods on the far bank, and a coffee fire under it, and 3 men. 2 of them she knew by sight, and the 3rd she knew a great deal better than she wanted to. Rance Deal was Harlan Vestry's foreman. He was about 40, sandy, quiet-mannered, and he had a way of doing hard things without ever seeming to enjoy them, which people mistook for decency for about 2 years, and then stopped mistaking for anything. He came out from under the fly with a rifle held crosswise against his chest, and he stopped on his own side of the plank and put one boot up on it, and he waited for her to come the last 50 feet, which she did. Morning, Mrs. Mabry, Rance, you'll have seen the proclamation. I have seen it nailed to 4 walls, Willa said. I have not yet seen it stop anything but me. Well, Deal looked back over his shoulder at the 2 men under the fly, then forward again. There's the trouble. It don't stop much except the people it stops. He said it almost apologetically. I got no authority of my own. Understand, county's deputized 11 of us for the quarantine. There's a man on the lower crossing and 2 at the upper and me here, and we turn back southern stock. And that's the whole of the job. These are pack horses under empty rigs. They are not a trail herd. They are not going to be sold north. They are going up to the Pardee depot and coming right back down again this afternoon. I know it. You have known these horses 6 years. I have. You have ridden that dun gelding on the left. You borrowed him off Tom in the spring of '82, and you kept him 9 days. Deal shifted the rifle. 11 days, he said. Then you know as well as I do that no horse standing here has ever been within 200 miles of a Texas herd. Mrs. Mabry, there is no line in the proclamation about what a horse has been near. He said it flat and without pleasure. There is a line about where a horse comes from. Yours come from south of the boundary. That is the whole of what it says, and it is all I have got to go on, and I am not the man that wrote it. No, Willa said. But I would like you to say out loud who is. And Rance Deal looked at her, and for about the length of one breath, something went across his face that was almost worth something. And then it was gone, and he was a man with a job again. Turn him around, he said. She sat the mare a moment. She was aware of everything at once, the way you are at the exact center of a humiliation, the flies working over the coffee fire, the sound of the creak in the gravel, the way the 2 men under the fly had stood up and come out where they could see, the way one of them was grinning and the other was not, and how she would remember which was which for years. She was aware that she was a woman on a $9 buckskin mare with 4 loose horses behind her in a country where every single thing had been arranged by men in rooms she was not admitted to. And she was aware, in a cold and useful way at the bottom of all of it, that she had 29 days. She got down off the mare. That surprised him. It surprised all 3 of them. She stepped down and dropped the rein and walked up to the plank and put both hands on the top of it, and she looked past Rance Deal at the road, going up the far bank toward Pardee, 90 yards of gravel and then the pull up through the cottonwoods, and she stood there long enough that Deal took his boot off the plank. How wide is your line? She said. Ma'am? The line. The quarantine line. How wide is it? Is it a fence? It's a boundary. It is a boundary 400 miles long, Willa said, and you have got 11 men on it. Deal did not say anything. You have got 3 crossings named in a proclamation and 11 men, and 400 miles, Rance, and everything between the men is grass. So do not tell me the country is closed. Tell me the road is closed. Say the true thing. The road is closed, Rance Deal said. Thank you, said Willa Mabry. She got back on the mare and turned the 4 loose horses with a swing of her arm, and she rode away south without hurrying, and behind her one of the men under the fly said something, and the other one laughed, and she did not turn around. And the buckskin mare walked out of that place with her head as low and easy as if she were going out to water, because a horse does not know when it has been insulted, which is one of the several ways in which a horse is a better animal than the thing riding it. 9 miles later she came over the last rise and saw her own place lying below her in the shortgrass, and she pulled up and looked at it the way you look at something you are about to gamble. It was not much. A soddy with a shingle roof that Tom had put on the second year, a frame barn with a hay door in the gable, 3 corrals of cedar posts hauled 90 miles from the canyons, a windmill that pumped from 31 feet and had never yet failed her, and a hill above the corrals with 1 grave on it. That was the sum of 11 years. And out beyond the corrals, strung along the head of the draw with their tails to the afternoon sun, 41 horses. She looked at them for a long time. They were not handsome, most of them, and she knew exactly how they looked to a man from Illinois. 14 2 and 15 hands, deep in the girth, short in the back, heads a shade too plain, hooves like flint, and a look about them of having been assembled out of whatever was to hand. There was not one animal in that band that Harlan Vestry would have let stand in his front pasture where the road went by. Strip-bred mares out of Mustang stock crossed on whatever good horse the country had thrown up in 20 years. A little Spanish blood, a little old Morgan, a steel dust horse somewhere back there that had walked out from Texas with a trail crew and never walked back, and not one paper among the whole 41 of them. And every one of them could carry 200 pounds 20 miles a day, week on week, on nothing but grass and water, and come in at the end of it and go out and graze. All right, Willa said out loud, to nobody, to the grave on the hill, to the mare under her. All right, then we do not use the road. Sim Dorset came down from the sandhills on the 18th because word travels in the Strip faster than it does anywhere with a telegraph in it. He was past 60 and had traded horses on both sides of the line since before the war. And he had one eye that worked and one that did not, and he had been the man who put a rope on the brown Mustang mare that was Tallow's dam 12 years before, in a blind canyon south of the Cimarron with 4 other men and a wing fence made of brush. He rode into the yard, looked at the 41 heads strung along the draw, and said, "You took the freight contract." "I did, and they shut the crossings on you." "They did." "Huh," said Sim Dorset, and got down, and that was the whole of the sympathy he offered, and it was exactly the right amount. They ate at the table in the soddy that night, with the lamp between them and Tom's road book open on the boards. It was a leather-covered pocketbook with a strap that had gone with him for 9 years. And in it in pencil were the things a freighting man writes down and never tells anybody, the distances between waters, the grades, which draws had a bottom and which had sand, where the wind came from in each month. Willa turned it around so Sim could see. 40 miles by the road, she said, and laid her finger on Pardee, and drew it up to the post. 3 days loaded, and I cannot use 1 foot of it. So we go west. Her finger went out from her own place, west across the Strip, 30 miles, to where the Little Sandy quit being a creek and came off the caprock in 3 dry draws, where there was no crossing to guard, because by then there was nothing to cross. Up out of the Strip there, over the divide, and onto the ladder, Sim's working eye came up. "The ladder," he said, "the ladder. That's 80 miles of nothing. It is 62 miles of nothing between the last water on the Sandy and the first water on the Adair Fork," Willa said, "and there is Chalk Springs in the middle of it, at about 34 miles, which makes it 34 and 28, and no horse ever born has died of 28 miles. If Chalk is running. If Chalk is running." "It was a wet spring," Sim said, "and it has been the driest August I recall. That spring comes out of a gypseam, and gypseams shut like a purse." "I know it. Then say the whole number." Willa put both hands flat on the table. 131 miles, she said. Home to the post gate. 7 days if nothing goes wrong. 19 head at 215 pounds, which is 4,085, and Bourne will not weigh me short, so call it 4,100 pounds. 3 people. 2 12-gallon kegs for ourselves, so we never touch the horse's water. out on the 9th of October, in on the 15th before dark. Sim Dorset looked at the road book for a while. The latter was a bench country, a long step up off the strip onto a shortgrass tableland that ran north for 2 days' ride, with hardly a landmark on it worth the name, and it was called the ladder because of the 3 rock benches you climbed to get onto it. And it had no roads on it, and no wells, and it had been crossed 100 times by people who did not write anything down. And it was, in September of 1885, one of the last long pieces of the United States that was still exactly as it had been. "Now say the other thing," Sim said. "What other thing?" "The thing about the horses. You are figuring on grass horses. Say it out loud, because you are going to have to say it to a lot of men in the next 3 weeks, and you had better hear yourself do it once." Willa looked at him across the lamp, and then she said it, and she made herself say all of it. A horse that had been fed grain every day of its life could not do this, not because it was weak, because it had been taught its belly. A corn-fed horse coming off the feed bunk onto short grass lost flesh in 4 days and heart in 6, and by the 2nd week it would not eat what was in front of it, because it was standing there waiting on the bucket, and it had been trained out of the only country it was in. Whereas a horse raised on shortgrass that had never had a bucket, that had wintered out, that had learned to graze in the dark and drink once in the day, and walk 15 miles between the two, that horse did not know it was doing anything hard. "That's it," Sim said. "That is the whole of it, and there is not one man on the north side of that line who will believe you. Harlan Vestry will believe me." "Harlan Vestry," said Sim Dorset, "believes you already. That is why there is a plank on the crossing." He said it and went back to his beans, and Willa sat still for a moment, with something going cold and slow along her spine, because it was the first time anybody had said the whole of it out loud, and once a thing is said out loud you cannot go back to not having heard it. Later, out at the corral in the dark, Sim leaned on the top rail and watched the band grazing out on the flat, and Willa came and stood beside him, and neither of them said anything for a while. The windmill turned twice, and stopped, and turned again. "That yellow mare," Sim said. "Buckskin, that yellow mare." He was smiling with the side of his face she could see. "Otley put her down as yellow, I hear. Otley put her down as off-color, bred by accident, no record." Sim spat over the rail. "I have been 41 years at this," he said, "and I have bought and sold better than 2,000 head. And I will tell you the single thing I know that is worth telling. A good horse is never a bad color." He said it the way a man says a psalm, without emphasis, because the words have been worn smooth. Never was. Never will be. Color is what you look at when you have run out of things you understand. You told Tom that. I told Tom that the day he bought this place, and he laughed at me too. He did not laugh. He laughed some, Sim said. "It's all right. Everybody laughs at the true thing the first time. It don't sound like enough." Out on the flat, the buckskin mare lifted her head and stood a moment against the last gray in the western sky, and then put it down again and went on eating. Willa said there is one more thing about her that they would put in the book if they knew, and it would be one more line against her. The cold mornings. You know it? "I broke her grandam's brother," Sim said. "Same blood, same trick." The whole of that line of horses, he told her, would hump their backs up like a hoop at the first hard frost of the fall, and stand there shivering and mean, and would not have a man on them. And if you climbed up anyway, they would drop a shoulder, and you would go off in the frozen dirt, and it would hurt you. "Walk them out 15 minutes, he said. "Just walk." By the time the sun was a hand off the ground, they would do anything asked of them until dark. It was not vice. It was a cold back on a horse that had been cinched wrong once by somebody in a hurry. And a horse remembers a hurry for the rest of its life. Odell Sykes was a man in a hurry. Odell Sykes, said Sim Dorset, was a man in a hurry his whole life, and he got everywhere late. They stood there a while longer. Somewhere off south a coyote started, and 2 others answered it, and then all 3 quit at once the way they do. 21 days, Willa said. 21 days, Sim agreed. You'll want a 3rd. I know it. I have been trying not to think who. Take the Spar kid. Pruitt Spar is 19 years old. Pruitt Spar, said Sim, has thrown a hitch under me for 2 summers and never once put a sore on a horse, and there is not another man in this county I would say that about, and half of them are 50. There was a problem she had not solved, and she solved it on the 20th, and the way she solved it was the first time anybody north of the line understood that they were dealing with somebody who thought. The freight was at Pardee. It had come in by rail, and it was sitting in the depot yard under canvas, 41 crates and 11 kegs, and a crate of window glass packed in straw. And Pardee was on the wrong side of a plank. She rode to Fort Adair on the 20th, and got in to see Captain Bourne at 11 in the morning. I want you to have it set off at Bowden Switch, she said. Bourne pulled a map across his desk, and found it. A water tank, a stock chute, a section house with 2 men in it, 24 miles west of Pardee on the same branch, out where the line ran on toward the Colorado country, through grass that had nothing on it but grass. Why? Because Bowden Switch is west of all 3 of the crossings named in the proclamation, Willa said. And at the head of the Little Sandy, there is no crossing at all. There is no water in the bed by then. It comes off the caprock in 3 dry draws. I can bring my horses up out of the strip there without touching a road, a bridge, a plank, or a deputy. Bourne looked at the map a long moment. You are aware, he said, that the proclamation does not say the crossings. It says the counties. I am aware. You are asking me to help you do a thing that a Cordis County grand jury might take an interest in. I am asking you to have your own property set off at your own convenience at a switch on your own supply line, Willa said, and I am telling you where I intend to be, because I would rather you heard it from me in September than from Harlan Vestry in October. Bourne got up. He went to the window and stood there with his hands behind him. That proclamation, he said, had been written to stop trail herds, 2,000 head of Texas cattle walking north up a road in July, shedding whatever it was they shed, and every honest man in the state knew it. It said horses, because the man who drafted it in Topeka had put in every animal he could think of, so that nobody could argue the edges. It had not been written about 19 pack horses under government freight, because the man who wrote it had never once in his life imagined her. He turned around. But it says what it says. Yes, sir, so I am going to give you a piece of paper. He sat back down and took a sheet of the Post's letterhead and wrote for perhaps 4 minutes, and then read it over and signed it and blotted it and folded it once and handed it across. It said, he told her, that the animals bearing this outfit were for the term of the contract employed in the transportation of the property of the United States, that the freight was government property in transit, and that any interference with it was a matter she might bring to him and he would bring to the department. It is not a pardon, Mrs. Mabry. A county officer who wants to arrest you may still arrest you. It is a piece of paper that will make a reasonable man think twice and will do nothing whatever to an unreasonable one. Willa put it inside her coat. It is more than I came in here with, she said. The car will be set off at Bowden on the 8th, Bourne said. You may have the use of the chute and whatever water the tank has got. Mrs. Mabry, and he stopped her at the door. 62 miles between waters. 62, with 1 spring in it. With 1 spring in it. I have been 11 years in this country, and 4 of them at Camp Supply, Bourne said, and I have never yet seen a spring in gyprock that a man could plan on. No, sir, Willa said, neither have I. She came out of the office into the sun with the letter against her ribs and went down along the front of the storehouses to where she had left the mare, and there was a man crouched at the mare's off-fore with the foot up between his knees and a hoof knife in his hand. She did not run. She walked up and stopped about 8 feet away and waited. He had white in his beard and a leather apron burned black across the front and forearms like 2 hams, and he was turning the foot slowly, this way and that, in the light, the way a jeweler turns a stone. "Ma'am," he said, without looking up. "I did not ask, and I ought to have. I saw her walk in this morning, and I have thought about nothing else since. You are the farrier. Caleb Ives, 9 years here." He set the foot down gently and stood up, and he was not tall, but he came up out of that crouch like a much younger man. "Mrs. Mabry, where did you get that foot?" "That is her own foot. I did not put it on her." "No," Ives said. "No, that is what I am saying." He wiped the knife on his apron and told her the shape of his 9 years. He shod 160 horses at that post. He shod them because they came out to him already shod from Leavenworth and from Riley with a wall on them like a fingernail, and he put iron on that, and in 11 weeks on this ground the iron had eaten the foot out from under them, and he was nailing into nothing and praying. Her mare had a wall on her 1/4 of an inch thicker than any horse on the post, black clean through, concave sole. Hard frog, standing square on all 4 with a heel under her, and not one nail hole in her anywhere. Has she ever been shod? Never. How much of the year is she on rock? All of it. There is caprock all down the west side of my place, and she has been walking over it since she was a foal. Ives nodded slowly. "You cannot buy that," he said. "There was a stallion at the Bar V," he said, "that had cost Harlan Vestry $2,200 in Lexington, Kentucky, and he had shod 3 of that horse's get, and they had a foot on them like a soda cracker, and every man in the county would tell you they were the best bred horses in 300 miles. He put the knife away. That is not bred in Kentucky. That is bred in rock, and rock don't write papers." Willa found that she had to wait a moment before she said anything. The Stock Association put her down as off-color, no record, she said. 9 days ago. Bred by accident. Caleb Ives looked at the mare, and then at her, and his face did not do anything much. "Well," he said, "I have been at this trade 31 years, and I will tell you what I have learned about a record. A record is a thing men write about a horse. A foot is a thing the horse writes about itself." He picked up his box. "Bring her by when you come. I would like to see her again. I would like to see the other 18 too, if you can spare the time, because if they have all got that on them, then I have got something I need to go and say to a captain." Choosing 19 head out of 41 took her 2 days, and she did it the way her father had taught her, which was to forget entirely what a horse looked like and think only about the shape of its back. A pack horse is not a saddle horse. A saddle horse carries a weight that moves with it and corrects itself. A pack horse carries a weight that does not know anything, that sits there dumb and dead still on a wooden tree while the animal goes up and down over broken ground, and everything that a rider does with his own body to keep a load kind, a pack horse has to be built to do without help. So Willa went along the fence and put her hand on withers after withers, and she wanted a wither with height and shape to it, because a flat withered horse will roll a load, and a rolled load will kill a horse's back in a day. She wanted a short, strong back and a broad loin. She wanted a horse that stood square and did not turn a hind foot out. She wanted a good deep barrel to hang a cinch on. And she wanted, more than she wanted any of it, a horse that would stand still when something came loose. She tried them for that on purpose. She rigged an empty sawbuck on each one and put 100 pounds of sacked sand on it and led the horse down into the draw and up the other side. And then, when the horse had settled and stopped thinking about it, she pulled the near lash rope free and let the whole thing go over. 11 of them jumped and stood. 9 of them jumped and went 2 steps and stood. 14 of them tried to leave the county, and of those, 4 came apart entirely and went bucking up the draw, scattering sand sacks and screaming, and those 4 Willa turned back out with the band and never considered again, and one of them was the best-looking horse she owned. Pruitt Spar came on the 23rd with his bedroll and his own saddle, and 1 spare shirt. And he was 19 years old, and had a bad haircut, and could not look a grown woman in the face for the first 4 hours, and by the second day he had thrown 11 diamond hitches for Sim Dorset, and had them all called good, and on the 3rd day Sim said out loud, in front of him, "That's a packer," and the child went red to the ears, and had to go and look at something in the barn. They built the outfit in the barn with the doors open for the light. 19 sawbuck trees, of which 11 were toms, and 8 had to be made out of ash she had been saving for a wagon tongue, and did not now expect to need. 38 sets of shoulder-shaped pads, sewn out of grain sacks, and stuffed with clean straw, and quilted through so the straw could not shift and ball. 19 cinches, every ring wrapped in leather, because a bare ring gets hot, and a hot ring rubs, and a rub becomes a sore, and a sore becomes a horse standing at chalk springs, while the rest of them go on without it. Lash ropes, 40 feet apiece, gone over by hand, foot by foot, looking for the place where the strands had opened. She weighed everything. That was the part the men in Pardee would not have believed if they had been told. She hung a beam scale from the barn joist, and she weighed each side pack separately, and wrote it in Tom's road book in her own hand, and she would not let a pair go out onto a horse unless the 2 sides were within 2 pounds of one another. Because 4 pounds of difference at the start of a day is a horse walking crooked at the end of it, and a horse walking crooked for 6 days is a horse that does not come home. The heavy iron went low and against the animal. The glass went on top, in straw, on the 2 steadiest horses in the string, and Willa put those 2 horses on lead ropes and led them herself, and did not let anybody else near them for 7 days. And through all of it, 3 or 4 times an hour, the Buckskin mare would come to the barn door and put her head in and stand there, watching, because she had never been able to stand being left out of anything. On the 26th of September, Sewell Pate came out from Pardee in a buggy. He was the bonding agent, a soft round man with a good hat and small hands, and he represented a company in Kansas City that had never seen the strip and never would, and he had brought a tally book and a pencil, and he wanted to count the security. Willa took him out along the fence and let him count. He counted 40 one head twice and wrote the figure down and looked out at them for a while. "They are not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Something with more." "Ah," he moved one small hand, "more to them." "There are 400 pounds more to a Bar V horse," Willa said. "About 300 of it is corn." Pate laughed politely, and then stopped laughing because he had looked at her face. Then he told her plainly, since they were both business people. Mr. Vestry had made an inquiry as to whether the security on the bond might be assigned. He would take the horses at $11 a head against the bond, that afternoon, in cash, and she would walk away with the contract canceled and no debt on her at all, and 41 times 11 was $451, which was $451 more than she had got. "And the mare? I beg your pardon?" He made an inquiry. "Did the inquiry say all 41, or did it name any?" Pate hesitated, and it was the hesitation that told her, and afterward she would think that the whole shape of the thing had shown itself right there in the soft man's paws on a September afternoon, and she had seen it, and had not yet known what she was looking at. There was a note, Pate said, concerning the Buckskin mare. Mr. Vestry would want her separately valued. Valued at what? He put a figure of $9. Willa Mabry stood at her own fence with her hands on the top rail and looked out at 41 horses in the shortgrass and did not say anything for some while. "Mr. Pate," she said at last, "write this in your book so that there is a record of it. There was going to be a great deal of talk in that county in about 3 weeks," she said, "and she would like one honest page in it." The security stood, all 41. She would deliver 4,100 pounds of freight to the platform at Fort Adair before dark on the 15th of October, and if she did not, he might bring his buggy out and take every horse on the place, and she would help him load them, and she would not say one word. Pate wrote it down. "And write the other thing," she said. "Write that Harlan Vestry offered $9 for the mare in September before anybody knew anything, and put the date on it." Pate stopped writing. "Why?" he said. "Because I do not yet know," said Willa, "and I would like to be able to look it up." She made the trial run between the 28th of September and the 1st of October, and she took 6 head under half loads, and she went to see 3 things: whether the way up out of the strip would take a loaded horse, whether the ladder was what she remembered, and whether Chalk Springs was running. Caleb Ives met her at the head of the Little Sandy on the morning of the 29th with 3 days of leave in his pocket and a mule under him and a canvas roll of tools behind the cantle, and he did not say why he had come, and she did not ask. The way up out of the strip was 3 benches of broken caprock in about 1.5 miles, and it was uglier than she had allowed for. Willa walked it twice on foot before she took a horse up it, and moved 11 rocks with her hands, and pried 2 more out with a bar. Then they came up onto the ladder. There is not much in this world like coming up onto the top of a country like that. The last bench falls behind you, and the ground opens out flat and gold in every direction at once. Buffalo grass cured on the stem and going silver, where the wind laid it over, and there is nothing on it. No tree, no fence, no smoke. A hawk 1/2 mile off, and the shadow of a cloud walking across 4 sections of grass, and the horizon on all sides so level and so far that you can see the curve of the world in it if you stand in your stirrups. Pruitt Spar, who had been born in Missouri and had come out at 11, pulled up without meaning to and sat there. "How far does it go?" he said. "2 days," said Sim Dorset. "Then it quits and does it again." They made 34 miles in a day and a half and came to Chalk Springs at 4 in the afternoon. It lay in a shallow saucer of ground with a low gyp ledge along the north side of it, white as old bone, where the grass gave out, and the water came from under that ledge in 3 separate seeps that ran perhaps 30 yards down a green trough, and then went into the sand and never came up again. There were 60 acres of ground around it, beaten flat by every animal that had lived on that country since before there were people on it. It was running. It was running about half what she remembered, thin and slow and tasting of the rock. But it was running, and when 6 head of horses had drunk their fill there, was still water coming, and Willa stood at the head of the trough with her hat off and let out a breath she had been holding since the 18th of September. Caleb Ives walked the ledge from one end to the other, and came back. "It'll hold," he said, "unless we get a freeze that shuts the seam, and it is too early for that. Then we can do it." "You can do it," Ives said. "I want to say the other half out loud, though, because if I don't say it I will lie awake." If that water was not there on the day she came to it, he said, she would be 8 miles past the point where she could turn around. Standing on a bald flat with 19 loaded horses and 62 miles of grass in front of her and nothing behind her closer than the switch. "I know it. I know you know it." They looked at each other across the trough. "I have thought about it every night since the 20th, Willa said. "I have thought about it so much I have worn it smooth, and it does not frighten me any more, which I understand is not the same thing as it being safe." Caleb Ives almost smiled. "No," he said. but it is the next best thing, and most men never get there. It was Pruitt who found the stake. He came up out of the trough at the low end with his hat in his hand, and said, "Mrs. Mabry, there's a post here," and she went down and looked at it. It was new pine, still yellow at the cut, driven knee-high in the sod about 40 yards below the last seep, and there was nothing written on it at all. Willa stood over it for a long time. "There was one like this at the middle crossing," she said, "on the 16th. Sim Dorset came and looked, and his working eye went narrow. "That's a corner stake," he said. "Somebody's run a line through here." "There is nothing out here to run a line to. There is water out here," said Sim. Nobody said anything else about it, and they camped a mile east of the spring so as not to foul it, and in the morning they started back, and it was on the way back, 22 miles south and west of the spring, on a bald stretch of the ladder where there was not one thing to look at, that the Buckskin mare tried to leave the line. Willa was riding her and leading the 2 glass horses. The string was strung out behind at a walk, and the mare, who had gone where she was pointed for 3 years without an argument, came off the line to the west and leaned into it. Willa checked her, and the mare came back, and then went again. Harder. "What is the matter with you?" Willa said. The mare's ears were forward and locked. She had her head up and her nostrils working, and she was not looking at anything Willa could see. They were 4 hours from any water she knew of. There was a shallow draw off to the west, perhaps 300 yards, one of 1,000 such draws, with a little dry sand in the bottom of it, and a stand of sunflower stalks gone brown. Willa let out the rein. The mare went to the draw at a good working walk, straight, like a woman crossing a room to a drawer she has opened 100 times, and she went down into the sand and put her nose down and blew and began to paw. By the time Sim got there, the sand had gone dark. He got off and knelt and dug with both hands, and at 11 inches the hole filled, slow, and it was clear. And it was sweet. Sim Dorset sat back on his heels in the sand and looked up at the mare for a long moment with his hat pushed back. "Well," he said, "is that a thing horses do?" "It is a thing some horses do," Sim said. "It was a thing a horse did," he told her, "if its mother had done it, and its mother's mother had done it, and every one of them back to the ones that came up out of Mexico 200 years ago, and had to find water in country like this, or not be here at all. It was not smell exactly, and it was not memory exactly. He had known 4 horses in his life that could do it, and every last one of them had been Mustang bred, and every last one of them had been called a scrub by somebody with money." He got up and dusted his hands. "That is what they crossed out of the book, Willa, right there. That is the line Otley put his pen through. And that night, camped at the foot of the benches, with the fire down to coals, Willa took a brush to the mare's shoulder to work out the winter hair that was coming in, and the light was low and across, and she stopped with the brush in the air. There was a brand on the mare's left shoulder, high and small, that she had never once seen in 3 years. It was a V with a bar over the top of it, and burned across the whole of it, at an angle, canceling it, was a second bar. Sim Dorset came around the fire and crouched and looked at it for a long time without touching it. "Bring the light closer." Willa brought the lantern. "That is a bar V," Sim said, "and that is a vent. Say it so I understand it." "When a man sold a horse out of his own herd," Sim said, "he burned his own brand out. That was the vent, a bar across, or the same brand run again on another quarter. And it meant this horse was mine, and is not mine, and I make no more claim." It was the oldest honest mark there was, and every association book in the West had a vent column in it. He sat back. "That there is Harlan Vestry's iron, vented, she was raised on the bar V, and she was sold off it. Then he bought her somewhere first, and sold her on." "No," Sim put one finger near the mark without laying it on her. "Look where it is. High on the shoulder, he said, small iron and stretched, the bar of the V wider at the bottom than the top, which was a brand that had grown. That was a foal brand, put on a wet foal in a corral, and then the animal had grown up around it. Nobody in that country branded a horse he had bought there. A bought horse went on the hip. That was a home mark on a home-raised horse. Willa, he said. She was foaled on his place. The fire ticked. Off in the dark the string moved a little on the picket line and settled. Say the rest of it, Willa said, because you have been standing on it since the second day you got here. Sim Dorset took his hat off and turned it around in his hands. 12 years ago last spring, he said, I roped a brown Mustang mare in a blind canyon south of the Cimarron. Took us 9 days. She was the last one out of that bunch to give up, and I sold her in Pardee in June for $22 to a man out of Ohio with a little money and a big idea, and that man was Harlan Vestry. Willa did not move. In 1873, Sim said, Vestry had no Kentucky horse and no book. He had 160 acres, a partner who had quit on him, and 11 head. And every one of those 11 had been strip-bred or Mustang or a cross of the two, because that was all there was out here, and there had been no shame in it, and nobody had yet thought to invent any. The brown mare threw him 9 foals in 11 years. 7 made using horses, and 2 made the best using horses in the county. And it was on the backs of those horses that he had gathered the cattle, that made the money, that bought the land, that impressed the bank, that lent him what he carried to Lexington in '81. That mare had built the Bar V, and Sim had sold her to him himself, and he had watched the man spend 30 years pretending she never happened. And the sire? A dun horse he called Sancho, said Sim, out of the same country. Rode him 9 years, and would not let another man throw a leg over him. He had traded the horse to a Chihuahua man in '82 for $200 and a set of silver bits, and Sim had been standing in the alley when he did it, and he had not been able to look at the animal while it was led away. Willa Mabry sat down on the ground. She sat there in the sand at the foot of the benches, with the lantern by her knee and her hand still on the brush, and she looked at the small, stretched, cancelled mark on her mare's shoulder, and put the whole of it together in about 90 seconds, and it was worse than she had thought, and it was also, in a way she did not want and could not get out from under, sadder. He had not done any of it to her. That was the thing. She had spent 3 weeks building a picture of a man who had risen at 4 in the morning to think of ways to ruin a widow, and it had been useful, and it had kept her warm, and it was wrong. Harlan Vestry had never once in his life gotten up thinking about Willa Mabry. He had gotten up thinking about the same thing every morning for 30 years, which was that he had come out of Ohio with nothing, and had built the whole of it on the back of an animal he bought off a one-eyed strip trader for $22, and that everything he now was rested on exactly the kind of horse that everybody now agreed was worthless. And that if that were ever to be said out loud in a sale ring in front of buyers, the $2,200 in Kentucky, and the coat, and the book, and the association, and the whole careful edifice of Harlan Vestry would be revealed to be standing on shortgrass. So he had vented the blood out. Cheap, through Odell Sykes, who was a man in a hurry and did not ask questions. He had put it in his own book as off-color and no record, so that no animal of it could ever stand in a ring against the get of the Kentucky horse and be compared. And when a widow in the strip had taken a contract with a string of that exact blood and had gone to prove in front of the quartermaster of the United States Army that it would do work his imported stock could not. He had not lain awake plotting. He had simply had the crossings closed. And a man for him had driven a stake at Chalk Springs. He is not fighting me, Willa said. No, said Sim. He is fighting her. He is fighting the fact of her, Sim Dorset said. Which is worse, because you can beat a man and you cannot beat a fact, and he has been trying for 30 years, and he has not slept right one night of it. Willa got up and put the brush away and stood at the mare's head in the dark with her hand flat on the flat plate of the mare's cheek, and the mare leaned into it slightly, as she always did, and shifted a hindfoot and went on chewing. $9, Willa said. What's that? He offered $9 for her, through pate. On the 26th, not 11 like the rest. 9. Sim thought about that. That is what she brought in the ring, he said. That is what she brought in the ring, and there is only one man in Cordis County who was not at that sale and knows the figure, and he knows it because it was reported back to him, because he wanted to know what she made. Willa's voice had not gone up at all. He has known where she was for 3 years, Sim. He has driven past my gate on that road 11 times a season and looked out at my horses. He knew the day I signed that contract exactly what was going to walk up onto the ladder. Then he knows what she can do. He knows better than I do, said Willa Mabry. He rode her father. On the 4th of October, Willa Mabry walked into Pardee. She rode as far as the middle crossing of the Little Sandy and got down on the south bank and tied the mare in the cottonwoods with a nosebag on her. And then she took her list and her money out of the saddle pocket and walked the 90 yards of gravel bottom and up the far bank on her own 2 feet, past the plank, past the fly, past the coffee fire, past Rance Deal, who stood up out of his chair when he saw her coming and did not sit back down until she was out of sight up the road. She walked the last 9 miles into town in 3 hours and a quarter, with the sun hot on the road and the sunflowers along the bar ditch gone to seed and black, and got to Pardee a little after 2 in the afternoon with grass seed in her stockings, and went first to the mercantile. Ottilie Prine was at the counter. Willa Mabry, she said, in the voice of a woman greeting a fire in her own kitchen. You walked. I did. Well, Ottilie put both hands on the counter, and then she told her, because she was not going to be delicate with a woman who had never once been delicate with her. There was a book being kept at the hotel. Ches Prouse had opened it on Tuesday. $6 said she would not put that freight on the Adair platform by dark on the 15th, and there was $51 laid against her as of that morning, and $11 laid for her, and 9 of that 11 was Ottilie's own. Willa looked at her. Why 9? Because 6 is a bet and 9 is an opinion, said Ottilie Prine. And I have watched this town for 19 years, and it is wrong about roughly everything. She pulled the list across and put on her spectacles. Now, coffee, bacon, flour, dried apples, and you want more salt than that if you are going onto the ladder in October, and I am giving you the salt. The feed store was worse, and Willa had known it would be, and went in anyway because she needed 40 feet of quarter-inch rope, and there was nowhere else in the county to get it. There were 9 men in there. It went quiet the way a room does, in stages, from the front to the back. Afternoon, Willa said. Ms. Mabry. That was Ches Prouse, the saddler, sitting on a nail keg with his hat on the back of his head. We've been talking about you. I have heard. We've been trying to work out the arithmetic of it. Prouse looked around to make sure he had them, and then he laid it out for the room. £4,000. On horses. Scrub horses, no offense intended, over the ladder in October, and not a drop of water on the ladder from the switch to the fork, excepting a gypsy that quit every fall like a bank clerk at 6 o'clock. And the woman doing it a widow with 2 hired hands, one of them 63 years old and half blind, and the other one still a child. That is the arithmetic, Willa agreed. You have got it about right. So what I want to know, Prouse said, is which part of it you have not thought about, because I cannot believe it is all of them. Willa took the 40 feet of rope off the counter and paid for it and coiled it over her shoulder. I will tell you what I have not thought about, Mr. Prouse, she said. I have not thought about you. Not one time, not on any of the nights I have been awake. I have thought about a spring, and about 62 miles, and about whether the near hind on a gray mare is going to hold up under 108 pounds, and about my husband, and about a stake somebody drove in the sod at Chalk Springs. And in 3 weeks of it, you never once came into my mind at all, and I would not have known that if you had not just now asked. Nobody in the feed store said anything. She got to the door and stopped with her hand on the frame, because there was one more thing, and she had decided on the road to say it if she got the chance. "Take the $6, she said. "All of you. Take all the $6 you can get down. Because when a man loses money, he remembers a thing his whole life, and I would like every one of you to remember this for the rest of yours." Harlan Vestry was waiting on the walk outside the association. He had his hat in his hand, which was somehow the worst part of it, and he said, "Mrs. Mabry, might I have 4 minutes?" And she said, "You may have 4 minutes here on the boards where people can see us," and he accepted that without any change of face at all. "You have found the vent," he said. That took the ground out from under her, and she made herself stand still on it. "How do you know that?" "Because you walked 9 miles to a town you could have written a letter to," Vestry said, "and because Sim Dorset has been at your place 11 days, and Sim Dorset has been waiting 16 years to say that to somebody." He turned his hat around once, and then he told her, and he did not soften one word of it, and he asked her to notice that he had not, because it was the only decent thing he had left to offer, and he would like the credit. Yes, he had raised her. Out of a brown Mustang mare, bought off Sim Dorset for $22 in 1873 by a dun horse he rode 9 years. He had vented her off at 2 and sold her cheap to a man who would not ask, and he had had her written into his own book as off-color and no record, so that no get of that blood would ever be led into a sale ring in Cordis County and set beside the get of his Lexington horse in front of buyers. "That is all true," he said. "Every word." "Why?" "Because they are better," said Harlan Vestry. He said it perfectly evenly, on a public boardwalk in the afternoon, with 2 men watching from across the street. "Not prettier," he said. "Not worth more money at Kansas City. Better. On this ground, on this feed, in this weather, for the work that was actually done out here. Better. And he had known it since 1879, and he had paid $2,200 in Lexington 4 years afterward in front of the entire cattle interest of 2 states, and a man does not get to know a thing like that and then say it out loud. There was no living in saying it. So he had built a book instead, and kept the book, and made the book mean something. And in about 11 days a widow was going to walk a $9 mare of his own breeding up onto the ladder, and take 4,000 pounds of United States freight across a country his horses could not cross, in front of a quartermaster whose reports were read in Chicago. "Yes," Willa said. "I am." "I know," said Vestry. "That is why I closed the road." He put his hat on. Then he made the offer, and he made it in front of the street. $600 that afternoon in cash, in the bank across the way, before 2 witnesses of her own choosing, for the contract, the bond, and the mare. She would keep the other 40 head, she would winter easy, and buy her glass and her wire, and never think about him again. "I am not threatening you," he said. "I want that understood. There is nothing further I intend to do." "There is a stake at Chalk Springs," Willa said. Harlan Vestry looked at her for a moment. "There is," he said. "And there is nothing unlawful about it, and I will not discuss it, and you will find out about it on the 11th like anybody else." Then he went inside, and the door shut, and Willa Mabry stood on the boards in Pardee, Kansas, with 40 feet of rope on her shoulder and 11 days left, and then she turned and started walking the 9 miles back to where she had left her horse. They pulled out of the home place at first light on the 9th of October with 19 head and 3 saddle horses and 2 12-gallon kegs. And it was cold, and the grass was white, and the buckskin mare humped her back up like a hoop and stood in the middle of the yard trembling and would not be got on. Pruitt's spar started for her with a rein. "Leave her," Willa said. "She's fixing to. Pruitt, leave her. Walk." So they walked, all three of them, leading out through the gate and up the draw with the strings strung out behind and the sun not yet up, and for 15 minutes the buckskin mare walked stiff-legged and hooped and furious, beside Willa's shoulder, like something waiting for an excuse. And then the sun came up over the rim, and the frost went off the grass in about 4 minutes the way it does. And the mare put her head down and gave a long shuddering blow, and was, from one stride to the next, an ordinary horse. Willa got on her without breaking step. "That's all it ever was?" Pruitt said. "That is all it ever was," Willa said, "and a man in a hurry called it an outlaw and knocked $11 off her price, and I have been feeding on that $11 for 3 years. They made the switch that afternoon, 31 miles. Bowden Switch was a water tank on stilts, a stock chute, a section house painted the color of dried mud, and 2 men named Kirby and Alt, who had not spoken to a woman since June, and were so pleased about it that they got in the way for the first hour, and were useful for the rest. The car was not there. It came in the next afternoon, the 10th 26 hours late, and the conductor said it had been held at Pardee for want of a switch engine, and he said it in a voice that had already been used several times that day, and Willa did not ask whose engine it was, and Kirby looked at the ground. So she lost the 10th. She stood on the loading platform while the crates came down the chute and did the arithmetic in her head, and the arithmetic said 100 miles in 5 days with a dry crossing in the middle of it, and she wrote it in Tom's road book that evening in pencil, and under it she wrote, "No help for it." Go, they loaded on the morning of the 11th in 3 hours and 20 minutes. That is the part nobody in Pardee could have watched without changing their mind about something, and nobody in Pardee watched it. Sim Dorset called the weights, and Willa set the pads, and Pruitt threw the hitches, and they went down the line, horse after horse, in a rhythm that had no wasted motion in it at all. Pad, tree, cinch, breeching, offside pack, nearside pack, top pack, manty. And then the rope going out and around and over and back, and the diamond coming up in the middle of the load like something rising out of water, and Pruitt's spar setting his boot against the horse's ribs and hauling the slack down until the whole load was one thing with the animal instead of a thing sitting on it. 215 pounds to a horse. Sheet iron low and inside. Nail kegs low. Lamp oil in the middle of the string where she could smell a leak. The glass on the 2 steadiest horses she owned, a brown gelding named Sorghum, and a plain gray mare, with no name at all that Tom had always called the gray mare, both of them on lead ropes in Willa's own hand. They watered every animal to the brim off the tank at 10 o'clock. They filled the kegs. They filled every canteen. And at 11 minutes past 10 on the morning of the 11th of October, 1885, Willa Mabry took a string of 19 unpapered strip-bred horses up off the section line and onto the ladder, and behind her Alt, the section man stood on the platform with his hat off, and Kirby said something to him, and Alt said, "I know it. I'm looking." The first day on the ladder was the best day of Willa Mabry's life, and she did not know that until years later. 22 miles. Flat gold grass to the edge of the world in every direction, and a high thin sky with 3 clouds in it, and the string walking easy and quiet in single file, with the loads riding dead level and swinging with the animals instead of against them. And the only sounds the grass going under 68 hooves, and the small talk of the pack rigging, and Sim Dorset up ahead singing 4 lines of something over and over, because he only knew 4 lines. She checked every load at the first halt and adjusted 2. She checked again at noon and adjusted none. At 3 o'clock she got down and went along the whole string, horse by horse. and put her hand flat under every pad, and along every cinch line and up under every breeching, feeling for heat, because heat comes before a sore, and a sore comes before everything. There was no heat anywhere on any animal. They camped dry at dark, and the horses stood the picket line quiet and grazed, hobbled at first light, and Willa lay in her blankets with the whole enormous black sky over her, and did the arithmetic once more, and got the same answer she had got at the switch, and then she slept better than she had slept since February of the year before. They made 13 miles on the morning of the 12th, and came up over the last long swell of grass at 11:30 in the morning, and there below them, in its shallow white saucer with the gyp ledge along the north side, was Chalk Springs. And there was wire on it. 4 strands of barbed wire on cedar posts, new, the posts still bleeding sap at the top where the wagon load had been sawn. Run in a square around the whole spring, and the whole green trough, and the whole 60 acres of beaten ground, with a gate in the near side, and a chain on the gate, and a canvas fly rigged in the shade of the ledge, and a man sitting under it in a chair he had brought out from town. His name was Emmett Sowell, and he was 26 years old, and he had ridden for the Bar V for 5 years. And he stood up out of his chair when they came down the slope, and he stayed standing the whole time, and he could not hold her eye for more than about 2 seconds at a stretch. "Mrs. Mabry? Emmett? I filed on this quarter the 22nd of September, he said, all in one go, the way a man says a thing he has practiced. Preemption. It's a lawful claim. It's recorded at the land office at Garden City. My shanty's up on the north corner, and this here is my water." Willa sat the mare and looked at the wire. 4 strands, new, tight, with the stays wired in, perhaps 3/4 of a mile of it. 2 men and a wagon, 4 days' work, $40 of wire and posts and hauling, out on a bald flat 60 miles from anywhere. To fence 60 acres of gypseep that no living soul had ever fenced in the history of the world. "Emmett," she said, "how much did they give you for the filing fee?" "Ma'am, that ain't how much." Sowell's jaw worked. "They give me the fee and $100 and the loan of a wagon," he said. "And what are you going to do out here in February?" He did not answer that. Sim Dorset had come up on the offside and stopped, and Pruitt Spar had come up behind him, and the string had strung itself out along the slope behind them, and stood 19 loaded horses in the sun with their heads down, and nobody said anything for a while. "I want to water 19 head, Willa said. "I will pay you. I have got $14 in my pocket, and it is yours, all of it, and I will sign a note for more." "I can't. I did not ask can you. I asked will you. Mrs. Mabry, I have got orders, and they are plain, and I am not going to pretend I don't." Sowell's face had gone red under the burn. "The gate stays shut to your outfit. Them's the words. Your outfit. By name." "Then say the rest of it," said Sim Dorset from the offside, "because you have been standing there fixing to." Sowell looked at the ground, and then out at the string, and then at Willa, and something in him gave way. "There ain't any water in there," he said. Willa did not move. "Say that again." "The north seep quit on the 3rd. Middle one quit the 4th. The one at the low end was still going," he said, "and it made about a gallon in 5 minutes, and he had been hauling his own drinking water off the Adair Fork in a barrel for 9 days. He gestured at the trough with a kind of misery. There was standing water in the bottom of it, maybe 2 barrels worth, green as a pond. And if she cut his wire that minute and turned 19 head in there, they would drink it dry in 90 seconds, and 11 of them would get none at all, and she would be exactly where she was standing now, only with a cut fence behind her. "I ain't saying it to be smart with you," he said. "I've been sat out here 9 days knowing you was coming." Pruitt Spar said, "Then what in the hell did they fence it for?" "Son," said Sim Dorset, "they fenced it in September." And there it was, and Willa Mabry sat on a $9 buckskin mare on a bald flat in Kansas, and understood, all at once, the whole ordinary shape of it. In September, the water had been running. In September, a wire fence around Chalk Springs was a knife at her throat. And $40 and $100 and a young man's filing fee had been a reasonable price for a knife. And then the gyp seam had closed the way gyp seams do, and the knife had turned into a piece of wire around a mud hole, and the man who had paid for it was sitting in a clean coat in Pardee, and this was at bottom the entire trouble with men like Harlan Vestry. They were always fighting the country, and the country did not know they existed. Sim came up beside her. He had the wire cutters out of his saddle pocket, and he was holding them down low against his leg where Sowell could not see them. "Say the word," he said. "Quiet, no. Willa, no." She did not look at him. "Put them away. Sim, put them away right now." Because if she cut that wire, then in 3 days there would be exactly one thing in Cordis County to talk about. And it would not be the freight, and it would not be the horses. It would be a woman out of the Strip who cut a lawful claimant's fence. He would take that trade every day of the week and pay to have it printed, and she was not going to hand it to him for 2 barrels of green water that would not do them any good in the first place. Sim Dorset put the cutters away. Willa Mabry got down off the mare. She walked forward to the wire and stood at it and looked through it at the white ledge and the dry trough and the 60 acres of beaten ground. And then she turned around and looked back at the 19 horses standing on the slope with 4,100 pounds of the property of the United States on their backs. And she took her hat off and put the back of her wrist against her forehead, and that was the only thing anybody saw her do in 7 days that could be called anything at all. Then she put the hat back on. "Emmett," she said, "what time did you last water your own saddle horse?" "This morning, out of the barrel." "How much have you got left in it?" 6 inches, maybe." "Keep it," Willa said. "Don't you give me any of it. If I take your drinking water and something happens to you out here, that is on me for the rest of my life, and I have got enough on there." She swung up. "The Adair Fork is 62 miles from this gate. We watered full at the tank at 10 o'clock yesterday morning. That is 26 hours behind us and 62 miles in front. And it is the 12th of October, and the freight is due on the platform at dark on the 15th. "Ma'am." "You can't. I know exactly what I can't," said Willa Mabry. She turned the mare and lifted her arm, and the string came up off the slope behind her and swung north. "Emmett," she called back, without turning around. "When you go in and tell him, and you will go in and tell him. That is what you are for. Tell him I came, and I looked at it, and I did not cut it. Tell him I said the wire was very well made. And tell him we went on north. They made 9 more miles that afternoon and camped dry on grass at 4 o'clock, and the horses grazed and did not look for water because there was no smell of any. And at dark Willa went down the line and put her hand under 19 pads and found no heat anywhere, and then she sat by the fire with Tom's road book on her knee and did not write anything in it for a long while. There was frost on the 13th, and the mare humped up again, and this time Willa did not have 15 minutes and walked her out anyway. And that was the last of that for the rest of the trip. They were on the trail by 20 past 6, with the sky the color of a fish belly in the east, and the whole of the ladder lying out gray and enormous ahead of them, and nothing on it. 53 miles to the Adair Fork. The wind came up out of the south at 9 o'clock, and by 11 it was blowing warm and steady, which was the one thing she had asked the world not to do, because a south wind in October on the shortgrass will take the moisture out of a standing animal the way a fire takes it out of a sock. She turned the string a point west of north, so the wind came on their quarter instead of their tail. It cost her about 1.25 miles, and it was the best 1.25 miles she spent that week. By noon the horses were quiet, in a way that horses are not usually quiet. They were still walking. That was the thing that Willa thought about for the rest of her life. They were still walking, in line, at the same steady 4-mile-an-hour road walk they had left the switch with. And the loads were riding level, and not one animal had tried to quit, or turn, or crowd. Their heads were lower, that was all. Their heads were lower, and their ears were back a little, and they had that drawn-up flat look through the flank. And when the string halted at the top of a swell, they stood without shifting, and looked at nothing. Sim Dorset rode up alongside at 12:30. "Say it," Willa said. "They'll go till dark today," Sim said. "Every one of them. And they'll go tomorrow morning, and about 10 o'clock tomorrow we start losing them, and by tomorrow night we will be walking and leading and cutting loads, and the day after that I would not care to talk about. That is the honest figure, and you asked. Then, here is mine." She had had it in her mouth since 4 that morning. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, if they had no water, they would cut every load off in a heap on the grass, and build a cairn on it and take the bearings, and run for the fork empty, and she would go into the post and tell Bourne where his freight was lying, and he could send 4 wagons for it in a week. The bond took her horses either way, late or empty. She had made her peace with the horses being took. She had made no peace at all with them being took, after she had already ruined 19 of them for a crate of window glass. Sim Dorset chewed on that for a mile. 4 o'clock, he said. 4 o'clock. You know that will be about 8 miles the wrong side of any chance at all. I know. All right, said Sim. That's the right line. I've seen men set it later, and I have helped bury what come of it. At about 20 minutes to 3 in the afternoon of the 13th of October, out on a flat piece of ground with no feature on it whatsoever, the Buckskin mare came off the line to the west. Willa checked her. The mare came back 4 strides and went again, harder. And this time she leaned her whole shoulder into it and swung her head, and Willa felt the whole animal change underneath her, the way you feel a wagon come off a rut. She checked her a second time and looked where the mare was looking. There was nothing there. That was what she wanted somebody to understand about it afterward, and nobody ever quite did. It was not a draw. It was not a green place, or a line of brush, or a difference in the grass, or a bird going down. It was the same gold shortgrass going away flat for 4 miles to the same empty horizon, and it was west, which was off the line, which was miles they did not have. Sim came up. She wants to go west. Sim Dorset looked at the mare for a good while. He looked at her ears, and at her nostrils, and at the way she had got her head up and slightly turned, and at her feet, which were doing a small restless thing that they never did. How bad! She has never done this to me, but the once. And the once she was right. The once she was right, said Willa. Sim looked west at the nothing. I have been 63 years in the world, he said, and about 41 of them I have spent telling men that a horse knows more about where it is than they do, and every one of them has agreed with me, and not one of them has ever done it. Let her have it. Pruitt Spar, who had come up on the other side and heard the whole of it, said Mrs. Mabry, that is going to cost us 3 mile out and 3 mile back, and it is 10 past 3. I know what it is going to cost, and if there's nothing, then at 4 o'clock we cut the loads, Willa said, and we will be doing it 3 miles west of where we would have done it, and nothing else about the world will be different. She let out the rein. The mare went west at a good long walk, straight, with her head level and her ears locked forward, and she did not cast about, and she did not hunt. She went the way something goes when it is not looking for a thing, but going to it. The string came behind, and the grass went under, and the sun came down on the left side of Willa's face, and nobody said one word for 2.5 miles. Then the ground tilted. It was so slight you could have crossed it 4 times and never known. The flat dished down maybe 14 feet over 400 yards into a blowout, perhaps 3 acres across, a shallow sandy scald where the sod had gone out sometime in the last 20 years and never come back, and around the rim of it, low and gray-green and unremarkable, was a fringe of saltgrass. And in the bottom of it stood 11 dry sunflower stalks 8 feet high. Sim Dorset said, "Oh," very quietly, the way a man says it in church. Sunflowers 8 feet high, in October, in a dry year, on the ladder. The mare went down into the blowout at a trot for the first time in 4 days, and she put her nose to the sand at the base of the stalks and blew twice and began to paw, and by the 4th stroke the sand coming up over her fetlock was dark. They dug with the pack shovel and with a frying pan and with their hands. At 20 inches it filled. It filled slow enough to break your heart, a hole the size of a wash basin, taking 11 minutes to make 4 inches of water, so Willa did not wait for it. She had them dig 3 more holes 10 feet apart, and she cut the manti-tarp off the lamp oil pack and lined the biggest hole with it and turned it into a basin. And Pruitt bailed from the seep holes into the basin with a coffee pot for 4 hours by lantern light, while Sim brought the horses up one at a time, on a halter shank, and Willa held them and let them drink and pulled them off before they foundered themselves, and put them back and brought them up again. It took until 20 past 10 at night to water 19 head and 3 saddle horses. Every one of them drank twice. Pruitt Sparr's hands cracked open across the knuckles, and he did not mention it until Kansas City. The buckskin mare was the last animal to drink, because Willa held her back and made her wait, which was the only thanks she had in her to give that was worth anything, and the mare stood at the edge of the light with her head down and the lantern making a long, soft shine along her shoulder, on the old stretched canceled brand. While 18 horses that a stock association had graded as unrecorded drank out of a hole in the sand that no map in the state of Kansas had ever had a mark on. The 14th coster. The north edge of the ladder does not slope down to the Adair Fork. It breaks off. There is a rimrock along it for 11 miles, 20 to 40 feet of caprock standing up out of the grass like a wall somebody quit building. Tom's roadbook had 2 ways down marked from 1881. The first had shed a slab the size of a granary across the chute in the 4 years since, and would not take a loaded horse, and the second went down well enough for 60 feet, and then turned into a stair. They lost 5 hours finding the third. They made 12 miles on the 14th, and came down to the Adair Fork in the last of the light, and the fork had running water in it, a foot deep and 60 feet wide, and 19 horses walked into it up to their knees, and stood there, and Pruitt Sparr sat down on the bank in his boots and cried for about 40 seconds, and then stopped, and went and got the picket line. 24 miles to the post gate. One day. They pulled out at 4 in the morning on the 15th of October, in the dark with the frost hard on everything, and the buckskin mare humped up, and Willa walked her out, and Sim Dorset walked beside her, and neither of them said anything, and by the time the sun came up, they were 4 miles down the fork with the strings strung out behind, and the loads riding level, and every animal in it, walking like it had come from somewhere, and knew where it was going. They made 18 miles by 2 in the afternoon. At the place where the fork road crosses the Cordes County Road, 6 miles short of the post gate, there were 4 men and a buggy waiting in the shade of the only cottonwood within 9 miles. Rance Deal. 2 men she did not know with county badges on their coats. And Sewell Pate, sitting in the buggy with his tally book on his knee, looking at his own hands. Willa halted the string 100 feet short and rode up alone. Rance, Mrs. Mabry, he did not get down. He looked past her at 19 loaded horses standing in the road, and something moved behind his face and was put away. You are north of the line. I am, with southern stock. With 19 head, raised 9 miles south of a boundary that was surveyed in 1867 by a man in a wagon, Willa said. Yes, I have got an instruction to seize them, Deal said. The whole outfit. Stock and loads, held pending a hearing at Pardee, and the hearing would be, he stopped, and started again. The hearing would be sometime next week. Next week. Sometime next week. And the freight is due on the platform at dark tonight. Yes, ma'am. I expect it is. Willa reached inside her coat and brought out a folded sheet of paper that had been against her ribs for 25 days, and it had gone soft at the folds, and there was a brown ring on one corner from a coffee cup at Bowden Switch, and she leaned down and held it out. Deal took it and read it. He read it twice. Then he turned it over and looked at the back, which was blank, and turned it again and read the signature and the seal at the bottom for a while. That's the quartermaster, he said. That is Captain Ellis Bourne, and that says the animals under him are employed in the transportation of the property of the United States, and that the freight on their backs is government property in transit, and that any interference with it is a matter for the department at Chicago. Willa let that sit for the length of a breath. Rance, I am not going to tell you what to do. But I would like you to think about which piece of paper you would rather be holding in 6 months. The one from Topeka that 100 men have got, or the one from Chicago with your name in it. One of the deputies said, Rance, shut up, Ori, said Rance Deal. He sat there in the road with the letter in his hand and the sun on him, and about 400 pounds of the rest of his life on the scale, and Willa Mabry watched him do it and did not say another word. Because there is a moment in every man's argument with himself when the worst thing anybody can do is help. Then Rance Deal folded the letter in half along its old crease and leaned over and handed it back to her. 11 days, he said. What? That done gelding. In the spring of '82. You said 9 and I said 11, and it was 11. And the reason I know it was 11 is that Tom Mabry never once asked me for him back, and I have thought about that man about every month since he died. He picked up his reins. Get out of the road, Ori. Rance, we got an instruction, and I have just now read a superior one. Deal said, and if Harlan wants to argue about it, he can come and find me, and he will find me at the Bar V for about another hour, and after that he can find me wherever a man goes who has been 13 years being somebody's arm. He turned his horse out of the road. Mrs. Mabry Rance, 2:20, he said. You have got 6 mile. Sun's down at 10 to 6. Don't run him in. That's all I'll say. Don't you run him in after all this. Walk him in like you meant it. Sewell Pate, from the buggy, said Mrs. Mabry, I am obliged to note the time of your arrival at the platform for the bond, and I will be following you in. And I want to say, and then he stopped, because he did not know how to say it. I want to say I have got $9 on you at the hotel, he said finally, which I put down on the 9th, and I did not tell anybody. So they walked them in. 6 miles at a 4-mile-an-hour road walk in the middle of a bright cold October afternoon. Down the last of the fork road with the post-water tower coming up out of the flats ahead of them, and the string strung out behind at 11-foot intervals, 19 horses in single file, with 4,100 pounds of the property of the United States riding level, and quiet on their backs. And people came out to see it. That was the thing nobody had allowed for. Alt, the section man, had told Kirby, and Kirby had told a brakeman, and a brakeman is the fastest thing in the world excepting a telegraph, and the story had gone up the branch line and back down it. A widow out of the strip has taken 4,000 pound over the ladder on scrub horses, and Chalk Springs is fenced. There were 11 men on the roof of the quartermaster's storehouse. There were laundresses and 2 officers' wives at the corner of the parade, with their hands over their eyes against the sun. There were 40 soldiers who had no business anywhere near the west gate at that hour, and Caleb Ives standing in his apron in the door of the farrier shop with a hammer forgotten in his hand. At 20 minutes past 5 in the afternoon on the 15th of October, 1885, with the sun a hand's width off the flats and the whole west side of Fort Adair the color of a new penny, Willa Mabry rode a $9 buckskin mare through the west gate at a walk, and behind her came 19 unpapered strip-bred horses that no book in Cordis County would record, and not one of them was being led. Captain Ellis Bourne came out onto the platform with his coat half on and stood there while they unloaded, and he did not say one word for 50 minutes. They took it off the way they had put it on in order, without hurry, and every crate came down onto the boards and was stacked and counted, and the crate of window glass came off the brown gelding sorghum, with 2 men either side of it and Willa's own hands under the bottom, and when they opened it on the platform an hour later, there was not one pane cracked in it. Bourne signed the receipt at 6 minutes past 6 by the office clock, in lamplight, with Sewell Pate standing at his elbow, writing the time in his tally book. And he weighed nothing, and he counted nothing twice. And afterward he said to a major at Leavenworth that it was the only freight he had received in 19 months that he had not felt obliged to check. Then he said, "Mrs. Mabry, I would like to look at your horses." He walked the line with a lantern for 40 minutes with Caleb Ives on one side of him and Willa on the other, and he lifted pads, and he ran his hand down cinch lines and under breechings, and along 19 backs from wither to loin, and Ives picked up feet, one after another, and set them down. There was not a sore on any animal in the string, not one. Not a gall, not a scald, not a rub, not a swelling, no heat in any foot, no filling in any leg. They had come 131 miles in 7 days, with 215 pounds apiece and 53 hours between waters, and at 6 o'clock that evening the whole 19 of them were standing in a government corral, pulling hay out of a rack like horses that had come in off a Sunday. Caleb Ives straightened up from the last foot and looked at Bourne across the mare's back. "Sir," he said, "I have shod at this post 9 years. I want it in the report." "It will be in the report," Bourne said. And it was. It went in on the 20th of October, 4 pages, from Fort Adair to the department at Chicago, and in the last paragraph Captain Ellis Bourne wrote a sentence that got him no thanks from anybody in Cordis County for the rest of his career. That in his judgment the animals purchased at the recommendation of local stock interests were unfit for the country in which the department proposed to use them, and that the horses bred on the shortgrass by people with no papers to sell were, for the actual work of the western posts, superior in foot, in constitution, in the ability to hold flesh on native grass, and in every particular except the appearance of the animal in a show ring. The specification for the next season's purchase came back from Chicago in February. It ran to a page and a half, and it said nothing about pedigree at all. It said range raised, wintered out, unshod at time of purchase, and it said native grass, and it said at the bottom, in a clause that 11 men in Kansas City spent the spring being furious about, that no preference should be given to recorded stock. Willa Mabry sold 41 head to the United States Army in April of 1886 at $55 apiece, and she kept 2, and one of them was a buckskin mare. Sewell Pate closed the bond and released the security on the 16th of October and drove home to Pardee, and on the way he stopped his buggy on the rise above the Little Sandy and sat there a while looking at a plank across a road. Ches Prouse paid out $51 at the hotel, and Odeley Prine collected 9 of it, and never once let him forget the other 42. Harlan Vestry sold the Kentucky Stallion in the spring of 1887, and did not tell anyone what he got for it. He kept the Bar V11 more years, and he was a good neighbor in a hard winter and a hard one in an easy one, which is what he had always been. And he never spoke to Willa Mabry again, except once, at a sale at Garden City in 1891, when he stopped in front of a 2-year-old filly of hers and looked at it for a long time and said, "That is a good hind leg," and walked on. Sim Dorset said afterward that it was the only true compliment the man had paid in 30 years, and it had nearly killed him. Emmett Sowell proved up on his claim at Chalk Springs and could not live on it and let it go in 1888, and the wire came down, and about 4 years after that the North Seep started running again, because a gypsum does what it likes. Rance Deal was not at the Bar V in an hour. He was gone before dark. He took the north half of the Mabry Range on shares in 1887 and ran his own iron on it in 1890, and he registered every horse he ever owned in a book he kept himself, in a tin box, and the first entry in it was made in his own hand, and it read, "Bay gelding, dun points, no papers, no record." Good. And Pruitt Spar, who was 19 years old and had a bad haircut, packed for the army out of 4 posts for 11 years and taught it to a great many soldiers, and when they asked him where he had learned to throw a hitch, he said, "A woman taught me," and it made them laugh every time, and every time he let them. Caleb Ives came out to the place in December with a wagon, ostensibly about a set of shoes. He came in January about a rasp. He came in February about nothing at all, and stayed for supper, and mended the hay door hinge without being asked, and in March he came out and sat on the corral rail in the cold, and said, "Willa, I have got 9 years in at that post, and a pension coming and a trade in my hands, and I am 44 years old, and I have been thinking about a thing since the 15th of October, and I am done thinking about it." And Willa Mabry said, "Then come down off the fence, Caleb, because I have been done since about the 1st of November. That is all anybody ever got out of either of them." They were married in June of 1886 at the house, with 9 people there, and Sim Dorset gave her away and cried in front of everybody and denied it for the rest of his life. She dug a well that summer, out west at the head of the draw, in a place the mare had shown her twice, and hit good water at 19 feet where 3 men had told her there was none. And she started a book. It was a ledger with a marbled cover that she bought in Pardee for $1.40, and she kept it on the shelf by the door for 31 years. And there is not one line in it about a sire in Lexington, Kentucky. There is a column for the dam, and a column for the country the horse was raised in, and a column for what its feet were like at 4 years old, and a column headed work, and under work there are entries in a small hard hand that say things like 80 miles in 3 days, October, no water, sound, and carried 240 all summer. No sore, and against one name at the top of the first page, in ink that has gone brown, it says only, "Found water on the ladder, 13 Oct. 85. See below." And there is nothing below. She never wrote anything below it. For 31 years she let that stand as the whole of the account, and everyone who ever asked her about it got the same answer, which was that if you had been there, you would not need it explained, and if you had not been there, she could not do it. Tallow lived to be 26. She raised 11 foals, and every one of them was written in that ledger on the day it was born, with its dam and its country, and nothing else, and the last of her line was still on that place in 1934. And a man from a college came out in 1931 with a camera and asked Willa Ives, who was 79 years old, what the breeding was, and she said strip horses, and he said, "No, ma'am, the breeding," and she took him out to the corral and made him look. Because there is a thing about a buckskin horse of that old blood that Otley the clerk never wrote down, and the association book had no column for. And Harlan Vestry could not bring himself to say, in a sale ring, and it is this: Down the middle of the back of that mare, from the base of her mane to the top of her tail, there ran a single unbroken line of black hair, a hand's width and straight as a chalk mark, the way it has run down the back of that kind of horse since long before anybody out here could write. They would not give her a line in their book. She came with her own.